Edward Goldsmith is an advocate of local economies and community control.
Well, I personally think that it's a great mistake to sell off this country to foreign capital interests. It's not only a great mistake to take, it's treasonable. It should not be done, because don't forget, it's the corporations who are going to run this country. Our government represents the corporations in England. The American government represents the corporations in America. So if your government represents the corporations as it does everywhere else, it'll be representing foreign interests. You're no longer, you've gone as far as you can get from representing the local people. This is no longer democracy. The main players are in essence, the big corporations. They already dominate 70% of world trade. But I'm talking about a lot of big corporations, tens of thousands. There are probably 35,000 transnational corporations. But all that, they're going to be slowly reduced in number. There's a massive concentration of industries. What we've done now is to remove all constraints on the behavior of large corporations. Basically, they can now do what they like. We have classified all laws that are designed to protect people, labor, society, local economies, traditional cultures, and the environment as, in inverted commas, non-trade barriers. Environmental laws have got to go. So laws which preserve all the important things, all the things that you and I think are important, are all going to be eliminated one after another. Rather than have massive free trade, we're moving to a system very similar to the Soviet system, except instead of being run by bureaucrats at the Kremlin, it'll be run by corporations who will be allying themselves with each other. They'll have alliances. There's no point competing anymore because they control the whole of world trade. And what they will be doing is putting down revolts from people who've been put out of their jobs by these huge corporations, whose waters have been polluted, etc. It's a new era we're entering. Now, basically, it is the corporations who are behind the whole thing. But the governments no longer represent people. We no longer live in a democracy. So what is happening now is that much of the trade that's occurring today is not trade at all. It's just internal transactions between corporations. And that's probably true of 30% of world trade. And because we now allow the big transnational corporations to do what they like, they're no longer subjected to any laws, it's probable that within 10, 15 years, 80% of world trade will be false trade. Because this is a very, very important issue, which our politicians, of course, haven't begun to understand. And that is we're going to enter a new era of corporate central planning. You are, in effect, telling a vast section of society that it's no longer necessary. We don't need you anymore. The working people, what do we want you for? We can get labor 50 times cheaper in China. What do we want to employ you fellows for? We don't need you as consumers because we export the stuff. And we can't afford a welfare state, because if we had to pay for the welfare state, we wouldn't be competitive anymore. There wouldn't be any jobs. So go off and look after yourself. And if you're not happy, we'll send in the police. That is what we are, in effect, telling working people in America, in England, and I'm sure that's what you'll be telling them right here in New Zealand. I don't see the point of it. This country's got everything it needs. It can be very self-sufficient. It can produce all its food. It's got all its fish. It's one of the most privileged countries in the world. It's extremely beautiful. It's got absolutely everything. Why you want to cover it in cement, pollute all the seas in order to maximize production, sell it all off to massive corporations who don't give a damn about this country. The government, of course, has absolutely no idea what they're doing. Our politicians are like children. They are, totally ignorant of what's happening. They haven't bothered to read the appropriate texts, And also they don't care. They're totally uncaring. Throughout the world, our politicians today are only interested in quick cash. And in particular, they're interested in serving the interests of the corporations from whom they obtain the support and the funds they need to stay in power. So this is to me one of the most depressing things that's happening today. And now that we have set up something called the World Trade Organization, which is going to be a super state running the economies of the whole world, you could say that corporations have been given the power to run the world. You could also say that we countries in like New Zealand and England and France, all the main countries that have signed the GATT agreements, you see, and agreed to set up the World Trade Organization, have given up the power to run their own economies to this super state, which is run by corporations, which in my opinion is an act of treason. These governments should be impeached for high treason, for giving up their sovereignty without even consulting the electorate of their countries. In my magazine, The Ecologist, which I've published for 26 years, we've documented how on two issues, transport and education, the reports that have been drawn up by the European Round Table of Businessmen, similar to your round table here, you see, were reflected almost word for word in the reports in the reports drawn up by the commissioners who govern Europe today. Now we're also told that free trade is the means of solving all our problems, providing jobs, you see, making people rich, making them healthier, paying for their education. It has exactly the opposite effect. So what we're saying is not only wrong. What our politicians and businessmen are telling us is not only wrong, it's the opposite to the truth. Now, world trade has increased by 11 to 12 times. 11 to 12 times in 40 years. What has it done for us? Has it solved all our problems? Are there less poor people? Is there more employment? Are there less homeless? Are there less sick people? Do we have a better educational system? In those 50 years, we've done more damage to the natural world on which we depend for our survival than we've done in the preceding 10,000 years. We can go further and say we've done more damage in the last 50 years than doing the whole of our tenancy of this planet. We've wrecked it. The world could not take a repetition of the last 50 years. It would cease to be capable of sustaining human beings and other complex forms of life. In these 50 years, we've created more poverty than we've ever had before, more unemployment, more crime, more delinquency, more malnutrition, more health problems. In spite of all the wonders of modern medicine, the incidence of every disease, with the exception of poliomyelitis and smallpox, has increased, if not escalated, throughout the world in the last 50 years. So when people tell us that world trade is going to make us richer and solve the problems of poverty and everything else, they're lying. They're just lying through their teeth. The indigenous people in general will suffer immensely from these deals. Have to. Because you're interested in preserving your culture, and cultures are being destroyed worldwide, and they're going to be destroyed even more. But talk about democracy. How can democracy means government by the people, but how can the people govern themselves when government is in Wellington? How can you participate in government in Wellington? And how are you going to participate in government when it's gone from Geneva by the World Trade Organization? Government is only democratic, i.e. run by people, when it's government by the community itself. This is the only way. This is the way we've always lived for millions of years. It's the only possible way to live in a manner that it satisfies our basic needs, you see, social, psychological, spiritual, and the only way that is in fact sustainable. We have no option. We have to reverse this terrible process. Instead of globalizing this economic development, we've got to realize that development is not a means of solving our problems, and that the traditional way of life was incomparably superior.